Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Resonant Arc Book Club. This week is the final week for Mistborn, Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. We finished it this week. Um, let's see. Let me lead off with this. I actually don't like it when I get so hooked on something that I just burn through it all in like one night. That's kind of what happened here for like the last stretch of the book. I got so hooked and was so like needing to know what happens next and how it ends that I just like read through it really fast, basically on Tuesday night last week. So right after we ended last week's book club, I finished the book that day. Here's the reason why I don't like it. Obviously, I like being hooked and I like being excited about what's happening and I'm into the story. That part I like, obviously. But what I don't like about it is that I feel like when I take it more slowly, like I'm coming back to it every day through the whole week. And so my mind is forced to sort of like remember what came before. Okay, this is where we're at. Okay, we're here now. And then I'll stop again and then I come back the next day and my mind is forced to sort of like recap. Okay, yeah, that's where we are. We're back to here again. So it stays fresh and it goes into your memory. Like you're refreshing your memory more. So the stories and the details stick with you a little bit more. But when I just like burning and reading all the way to the end, I tend to forget, like things become foggy, even if I only read it like 1 week ago. So when I was going through Brandon Sanderson's annotations, his notes on the chapters, there were certain things I was like, wait, did I miss that? Or I don't really remember that too well. So there might be some examples where that creeps up in today's conversation. Hello, Steve and CJ. I really wanted to get in reading, but I have no idea where to start. Well, you can start with us next week, because that's the next thing I'm going to bring up. You can start with us on Crime and Punishment, which is what we'll be reading next. I'm going to, let me just go ahead and show you guys. Okay, I'm going to show you guys this right now. So if you go to YouTube and you search Crime and Punishment audiobook, you have part 1 and part 2 right here of Crime and Punishment. This is the next book we're going to be reading, and you can listen to it if you would like instead of reading it, or you can do both. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the fact that there's different translations and stuff for this at the end of today's discussion, but essentially because there's a version like a version of the book that is in the public domain now and is easily accessed, I think that we're just going to go with that version. So but I've read through a couple of different excerpts from different parts, and it's not the most I don't know, the prose in this version is not as good as in other translations, that's for sure. But its ease of access and the fact that we can get everyone to look at the audiobook here if they want to, I think will just make this easier, and everyone can be on the same translation and have to deal with all that. So anyways, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But you can join us with Crime and Punishment. I suggest that you do. Rob says an hour, 55-minute recap, then summed it all up in about 1 minute. Very clear and concise timeline. I will have to check that out then. Okay, so as always, let's start off with my own notes, and then I'll move into Brandon Sanderson's notes and go from there. So they have, or he has Vin going to these balls when the house war is basically right about to start. Like, people are making their final alliances. Everyone's real suspicious of each other. She's having a hard time like reaching out to anybody. Her house that she's pretending to be from is not one of the high-ranking ones, and so she's being shunned by a lot of people. And you know, it's just all of the. What I liked about that scene too was that it made a lot of sense for me that Vin has grown up with terrible abandonment issues and fears the change that she knows is coming, where, the end of things that she actually really loved, the new crew, the trust that was built there, the splendor of going to the balls, all of these things that she found in this new life that she's living, that she has loved and grown attached to, she senses the end of all of that coming. And so, the fact that this ball was supposed to be the last one she attends, and she wanted it to, be sort of like the last hurrah, the last chance she has to enjoy one of these things, ends up being really awkward. And, it's just a revelation that things are coming sooner than she wanted them to. And emotionally, that really worked for me. I really, really enjoyed that. But after that all happens and she ends up learning about the plot to assassinate Elend, and she goes to try and save him from the assassins who are there at Keep Venture at the time, the revelation that Shan is a Mistborn was really effective for me. Because we knew that she was a Misting, at least because she was soothing. Throughout the story, Vin could tell that she was soothing her emotions. And so we knew that she was at least able to do that. But then revealing here that she's actually a Mistborn was a really cool moment. Kind of one of those oh crap moments where Vin's like one advantage over Shan, who, she allowed her to like abuse her and mock her and scorn her because she's playing a part. But I felt like emotionally, like the one thing that she felt like she had at least a one, because it really bothered her, the things that Shan would say. It really, like, she was upset by it. But I think, like, intuitively, like the one advantage she felt like she always had, well, at least I'm a Mistborn kind of a thing, like that's where she could kind of draw her confidence to do what she's doing there. And then to realize that Shan, who had been this condescending figure who was intimidating to Vin, was also a Mistborn, a trained Mistborn, was like, holy crap, that sucks. It's a moment where she became like much, much more intimidating all of a sudden, and I really liked it. I thought it was a shame that she had to be killed right here. It would have been cool if she had continued to be a villain to Vin, maybe throughout the series or something. But really, really nice. Really, really nice reveal there. I thought that was super good. Restless Oblivion says, I like how the one girl was pretending to be a dumb gossip. Yes, Kliss, I think is her name. That was really effective too, right? The whole thing that was effective about it was that, and this is all part of Vin's arc, this where she doesn't trust anything anyone says or does or whatever in the beginning. But then she like learns about trust, right, from Kelsier, and learns about like his optimistic sort of like worldview, and how life is better when you're happy and you choose to trust and you choose to believe in people, even if you will end up being betrayed, right? And she sort of starts adapting that, but she kind of just forgets how skeptical she used to be. And the fact that she's surprised by Kliss not being who she pretended to be. The fact that all of the nobles are this way just really hits her, and she wanted to believe that there was some good in them. And, it's just a really nice sort of like mixture of emotions, and part of her wanting to latch on and believe in people, and carrying that over not just from the crew but into the nobility as well, and the betrayals that she faces there, sort of like reinforcing the words that Reen always taught her. I don't know, I really liked that. It was really good. I wrote here that the reveal that Inquisitors and Vin can see through copper clouds was also very effective. Because she had been surprised when she was being chased by the Inquisitor earlier in the book, when they had first tried to like raid the palace and find out what was in that room. And she thought that she had pretty much escaped the Inquisitor, but then he caught up with her. And so the fact that she's burning copper, which is supposed to conceal your use of allomancy, but the Inquisitor was still able to catch up with her, basically. And I think she had a conversation with Kelsier somewhere where she suggested this. And he was like, no, that's not possible, or whatever. So the fact that Inquisitors and now she herself are able to see through copper clouds, suggesting like sort of like another power at work here, or at least a hidden element of allomancy that has not been described yet, was really effective. I really liked that moment too. What's up, Dude McGuy? Happy Book Club Day. Restless Oblivion says, I kind of wish that Vin's Mistborn revelation to Elend had happened in this chapter instead of later, where there's too much going on to really savor it. Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting point. I don't know, because that would have necessitated a lot of rewrites, because a lot of like what's driving Elend towards the end of the book is finding her and rescuing her, and it's, I think, a really nice reveal to him when he's there trying to rescue her that she doesn't really need his help, that she's a Mistborn. And I think that him realizing it there was actually pretty effective too, to me at least. So, Spyglass says the battle scenes are always easy to follow. I can literally play out the fight as if it's the Matrix. He does describe action really quite well. I agree with that. My next note here was, they hit me where it couldn't have hurt worse. I'm going to do likewise. Oh, that was the line from Kelsier. That really hit me. When they think that Marsh has been killed by the Inquisitors. And there's that really just like, because it's such a nice transition. He's going and he's visiting Ska and emboldening them and like giving them hope. And we learn later that, you know, that's kind of like the whole crux of his plan, which he didn't reveal. I don't really know why he didn't. That's part of this whole like mysticism to Kelsier that I wasn't the biggest fan of. How like it didn't seem like there was a need to keep that part of it hidden from everybody. But anyways, he's going and he's like giving hope to people. There's a really hopeful moment there. Like things are going the right direction. We're having some hope again since the big failure of the army. And then the Marsh death scene, quote unquote. And he just turns around for that, says, I'm going to hit them, or they hit me where it couldn't have hurt worse. I'm going to do likewise. And so he goes to the atium mines, the pits, and destroys all the atium. Part of that moved a little fast for me and made me wonder why Kelsier had not done that a lot earlier. Why he hadn't just, if he can just go in and just like destroy the entire like mining operation of atium, like why hadn't he done that before? You would think that it would like crippling the empire like that before now, and them not having like the funds to be able to, I don't know, like fund the mercenaries that work for them, would have helped in the pursuit of like reducing a military presence so that their army would have a better chance. But I don't know. He's not going to let his good friends know that his plan is to die. That's not the part I'm talking about. I'm not talking about letting them know that his plan was to die, so much as letting them know that the plan is that he's going to get the Ska in the city, like, ready to actually do something. And you know, that's the reason why he's visiting the Ska and why he's building up his reputation and all this stuff. That the purpose of it is that he's planning on the Ska within the city themselves uprising and fighting. But yeah, obviously concealing the part that he's actually going to sacrifice himself for that is probably not the best thing to say. He's pretty traumatized by the place. He did not want to go back there. I can see that, I guess. I don't know though. I feel like he's a strong enough person, or at least has exhibited that he's a strong enough person that he's willing to do basically anything necessary to succeed. So I don't see that place being traumatizing. I mean, I see it being a traumatizing place, but I don't see it being traumatizing enough to get in the way of, if this is going to help me beat the Lord Ruler, then I'm going to do it anyway. So I don't know. Okay. Next note I wrote is, I know he was setting up the end of the crew when they were drinking and laughing. But it really hit me when she says we're not invincible and Doc says we're not helpless as they moved forward. It really hit me emotionally then that this was the end. So when they're bringing in the carriages for the executions, and it's all of like Renault's retinue, like all of his people, right, in the carriages, and they're bringing them in to execute them. The whole thing was a setup to try and get Kelsier to reveal himself, and the Inquisitors were all there, and they're going to kill him and stuff like that, and hopefully capture Vin. That's kind of their plan, right? So when he goes in and he decides he's going to fight him, and Vin's trying to convince everybody, like, no, because, again, she does not want it to end. She doesn't want it to be over. No, the crew, this is the moment I was so afraid of, you know. We go back to that scene where they're all drinking and laughing together, and he kind of writes about how she just is content in that moment and happy. And I knew that that was sort of like a setup for things to start really going bad. And, you know, I felt that there, but where I really felt it, especially for her, was when she's just trying to convince everyone, like, don't go. She tries to tell Kelsier not to go. He goes. Then she's trying to tell Dox and Breeze and Ham and everybody, like, do not go. Like, we can't. We're not invincible. What she's really saying, the subtext there, I feel, is not just about trying to convince them to save their own lives and not, you know, go and be rash and get themselves killed, but she doesn't want this part of her life to end, where she kind of sort of found like a new hope in life and a new element of herself, and had learned to sort of let go of the oppressive thoughts of Reen and her mind controlling everything she did, controlling how she thought. And she sees that this, at least I saw, this was the beginning of the real end of this, the end of the crew. And it hit me emotionally. It really did. I was like, man, that sucks. Like, that sucks. Because I think it was obvious Kelsier was going to die in the scene, and who knows who else. Like, I didn't know if a lot of the other guys were going to die too. I was actually surprised that not more of the crew ended up dying. But that moment was really emotionally effective for me. The last note that I made was she only realized at the end that the Lord Ruler was a fearochemist. So yeah, when after Kelsier's death, and they're all like, well, what do we do now? And then they see all the people, all the ska, like kind of gathering together and getting ready to rise up and everything like that. And then they find the Kandra, who essentially delivers like the final note from Kelsier and gives everybody their jobs and says, like, this is all part of the plan, and like, here's what you need to do now. And she decides she's going to go to the Lord Ruler's palace. She sneaks into the same room that Kelsier had been trying to get into for years, gets in there past the Steel Inquisitors, and essentially sees the old ruler, or the old ruler, nice, but my brain, the Lord Ruler as an old man in that scene. It was like, holy crap, he's a fearochemist. Because he had already set up the entire idea of you store age, and like, he had tried to, I think, kind of slide in there that was like a more useless power for fearochemists, the idea of storing your age inside of a metal, and then, you know, like, the purpose of it maybe just looking younger to disguise yourself, but beyond that, they hadn't found much use for it. And it was in that moment where she sees the Lord Ruler, and he's an old man, that it's like, oh, he's a fearochemist. He's using that to keep himself young. That is the source of his immortality somehow. Obviously, it's not just feruchemy, because, the other feruchemists can't achieve eternal life through this means, but obviously that's what's going on here. So the fact that then, after the whole escape and fighting him again and using the 11th metal and seeing him as in the past version of himself, and the fact that that all led to the revelation in that moment that he's a feruchemist, I was like, oh yeah, of course, like, duh. How did you not know that? How did you not know that? By seeing him young in the streets and old in the room. He's a feruchemist, obviously. Maybe it's just the fact that the thought that you can do both allomancy and feruchemy at the same time, like, just was beyond her comprehension. I don't know. But it seemed like pretty obvious to me at that time. So the fact that that she tried to use the 11th metal in the way that she did to sort of like kill his past self, and the fact that she thought that was going to work. I'll talk about that in a minute, and I get to some degree why she would have maybe thought that, but to me, when it didn't work, and I didn't really think it would, because the first time she burns the 11th metal, it's in that room, and she's sort of distracted by it. She sees like this other version of him there, and it's like, and I was thinking maybe because I think I was a little bit sort of like stuck on the fact that the 11th metal was the key to defeating the Lord Ruler. He had set that up for so long that I was like, okay, I was kind of just sold on the fact that the 11th metal was the key. So it's like, oh, maybe you got to like kill that past self or something like that, But I thought about it more as like she was imprisoned and like the whole escape sequence happened, and then she got up there and she's like, I think I know how to kill the Lord Ruler. And I was like, well, I think she's going to try that, but I'm not sure if that's actually going to freaking work. Like, how would that work? He hadn't explained, and the reason why I didn't think it was going to work is because generally he is very adamant and very consistent about the fact that he has to explain how magic works before revealing or showing it happen. And he hadn't really like shared or revealed how that concept could work. And so I was like, I don't think this is going to work. And then she goes in there and tries to do it, and it's like, it doesn't work. She's like, oh, I failed. And it's like, that was it. That was your plan. But anyways, it seems to me, if I remember correctly, that through the 11th metal, she realized he was a feruchemist. But it was like, obviously he was a feruchemist because you saw him as an old man and a young man. I mean, that's all you really needed. So the 11th metal, and this is actually okay, though. The fact that the 11th metal wasn't really the key to defeating the Lord Ruler, I think is fine. That's kind of maybe what he likes to do with his subversion of expectations. But at least it seemed to have served the purpose here of her realizing that the Lord Ruler was using feruchemy, which led to, I have to use allomancy the way the Lord Ruler is by actually, and I liked that twist too, where, because I think I remember even saying here on Bookclub, back when Kelsier explained that you can't affect metals that are pierced through the body or that are inside the body. So allomancy, you can't affect metals that are inside of a person. I remember even then going like, why not? He doesn't really do much to explain the reason why not, other than to say, that's just how it is. That's the rule. You can't. So, if you have metal piercing you, usually it's fine. Or, the metals that you're burning in your stomach, no one can affect you. Only metals on the outside of the body can be affected by allomancy. The whole time I was like, huh? Like, that didn't make any sense to me. So I liked here that, that rule is obviously just a basic and maybe like a misunderstanding of like most allomancers, and the fact that you can actually affect allomancy in the body, and that the Lord Ruler was doing that was a really, really cool moment. I liked that a lot. It was a good payoff for the setup sort of that happened earlier in the story. And so then Vin, drawing on the mists, which I think is a third type of magic system, hemorrhagy or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember him explaining that too well. That's probably meant to come in the later novels. But the fact that she was able to draw on the mists and then pull the metals out of his body and then like throw them out the window, and then he aged so quickly. I thought that was a really cool moment where it again is setting up that Vin's much more than just a Mistborn, just a powerful Allomancer, that she has access to more than one magic, the way that the Lord Ruler does. And so that set up some nice intrigue for future novels and stuff like that. But despite all of that, despite that there are unanswered questions, Hemilurgy, thank you, Rob. The fact that there are unanswered questions at the end of this, it's not completely wrapped up. Obviously, there's still ash and, the red sky and brown plants, and there's a very dicey situation with the new government. He still manages to really close this thing in a satisfying way, in a way that feels like a happy ending. And I love that, because so often, like, the temptation is to end things on cliffhangers, end things so that they feel unresolved, and you go, oh, I need to see the next thing. I think the worst example I have ever seen of this in my entire life was Prince of Persia: Warrior Within. The first Prince of Persia game, I don't think that they were planning on a sequel, right? So it ends, it's very self-contained, it's great. Then they do Warrior Within. It more or less felt like it had a self-contained resolution to it. And then they just have him on the ship sailing back, and he sees Babylon is on fire, and he's like, no, what's going on? And it's like, guess what? You're waiting for a year and a half or however long it's going to be until the next game comes out, and you're just going to sit there and wait to see the resolution. I hate it. I hate it when stories do that. And he did a really, really good job of resolving this book, making it feel self-contained, ending it on a good note, while still leaving threads open to expand later. And that was actually something I was really struggling with, until a few months ago, when I sort of decided for my own novel, like, how am I going to end this thing? Because I'm kind of telling like 4 stories at once. And so my first novel is more or less the inciting incident of 4 different characters. And it was ending on really sour, depressing notes for all of them, because it's the inciting incident. It's what forces you into the story. It's what forces you to get involved and move forward, and now I have to do something, right? But it's hard to make a book feel resolved and self-contained and complete, and I was really struggling with that. I came up with some ideas now on how I'm going to make that feel better. But that was one thing that really struck me about how he ended this. And he wrote in his annotations, we'll get to that too, like how important it is for him and how much he likes to write endings. So I thought the ending was actually very, very well done. So those were my thoughts, my notes on Mistborn. Really great book. Let's jump into some of his annotations and discuss these a little bit, and then we'll wrap up. Rob says hemilurgy is blood magic. And then Rob says Star Wars Episode 3.5, how to set up a new government from the ruins of an evil empire. Dude McGuy says the latest Fantastic Beasts movie had a really terrible unresolved plot thread, I felt. Or had some really terrible unresolved plot threads, I felt. Sequel bait to the max. Absolutely. I felt the same way. Did not like how that movie ended at all. Okay. Moving into the annotations here. Man, he writes a lot of annotations. A freaking ton. Reading through them takes like an hour and a half. So here he says it was extremely important that Velen reject Vin in this chapter. I worry that I got a little bit into convenient motivations. I always hate it when men and women have relationship problems in a book simply because it's the place in the story for things to go wrong. Weak conflict, something a friend of mine calls Deus Ex Wrench, is a problem with most romantic comedies. I agree with him, but I think he did a good job with this. Better to have realistic rather than feigned tension. I hope that I was able to manage that in this chapter. Elend is being almost completely honest with his emotions here. He's just discovered that Vin was lying to him all along. Rather than feeling bitter, However, he feels like a fool. That actually did really work for me because the reason he liked Vin in the first place is because she was so different from like the rest of the nobility, right? Um, he seemed to feel like genuine honesty from her, and so then to find out that she's not being honest about who she is the whole time would really hurt. And I felt that it was very believable that he acted the way he did. And I thought that the drama here was not ham-fisted at all. I felt that it was really natural. So he did a really good job with that. So he turns her away. The vital part of all this, of course, is that this gives Vin the chance to love him and protect him, even though he's rejected her. This is perhaps the most important step for Vin in the entire book. She's learning that the things that Kelsier talked about, the truth that she needed. With this in hand, she can trust people, even knowing that they might betray her. Yes, also, very good point and very true. It's a vital character moment for her that she protects him even though she was rejected. Shows the change that she's really gone through. I really liked that a lot. He says, anyway, it was time for someone to say the things that Vin did in this chapter. Kelsier and his group are a bit disconnected from regular ska. In a way, they're like Elend and this little band of philosophers. They feel bad for those beneath them and talk about helping, but it's really hard for them to really understand the ska. I thought that was a really poignant moment, too. I didn't make a note for that, but I did feel that. I should have made a note for that because that was really powerful. I really liked that outburst from Vin, and it really sort of like put things in perspective for the crew. And she was very right. And later when she sort of apologized for saying it, it's like, don't you apologize for saying that? Everything you said was true. That was the freaking truth, and they needed to hear it. I really liked that. Oops. I'm not showing this. Okay, Rob says, I like that bit below the highlight. Now if Sazed's leaving her alone didn't hint you that something was coming, well, you need to go back to foreshadowing school. Yes. I thought that was funny too. I liked that. Anyways, I'm only showing this part because this page has some potential spoilers. I didn't read them. Kind of just skipped past them, but Rob warned me of it, so I just wanted to read this part at the bottom. You know, I always talk about how I like happy endings, and yet everyone always complains that I'm too brutal in places. Here's a good example. Kelsier dies. Yes, he's really dead. Yet his death isn't truly that sad to me. He accomplished a lot and died facing down the Lord Ruler himself. It's not a sad death. This I agree with, actually. It sucks when he dies because he was my favorite character, and kind of like, you know, Gandalf's fall as another example, before you know that he comes back, which I'm not sure I've ever really agreed with for Lord of the Rings, but that moment where like the foundation, the bedrock of a group is lost is a devastating moment. But it isn't sad in the sense that Kelsier did exactly what he intended to do, and he got the chance that he wanted to face the Lord Ruler when he had the 11th medal and tried to fight him. Well, actually, didn't really try to fight him, did he? He just let him kill him. But anyways, he died facing the Lord Ruler. He died having accomplished what he set out to do, and so it isn't a sad death, and I liked that. It was satisfying despite the fact that it sucked. Here he says, as surprises go, I think this is one of the better, but definitely not one of my best. It required keeping too much back from the reader in Kelsier's viewpoint, and it required too much explanation after the fact to make it work. There's a much better surprise later on. See, he's talking here about putting these two things together so that growing reputation was part of the plan. So he's talking about Kelsier, his death being part of the plan all along, and, you know, getting the ska to uprise and actually like try and do something about it was all part of his plan. There's a much better surprise later on. Still, I'm pleased with the bang on this one, especially since I got to have such a beautiful scene with the crew standing atop the building, the mists coming alight around them, as if representing their own growing understanding of the job they've always been part of. Yeah, it was effective. It was good. I liked it. Let's see. Rob says, oh, wait. Spyglass says, I really enjoyed the description of the Lord Rulers. Hold on, let me pull this up again. I really enjoyed the description of the Lord Ruler's power. His soothing ability soothed me. Rob says, I like that bit below the highlight. I read that part. Dude McGuy says, tragic death. Chocolate Rob says, the scene of her snapping at the crew comes back in book 2. That makes me angry at the crew. Oh, so she yells at them again for the similar things in book 2. And you're saying that it made you upset with like the crew members in that story. Restless Oblivion says, I'm really glad that Kelsier got to defeat an Inquisitor before he died, because otherwise I'd feel like his death was cheaper or something. He finally got he got a final badass moment before he was completely outclassed by the Lord Ruler. Yeah, I liked that fight with the Inquisitor, and I liked the fact that he beat the Inquisitor too. It's a really, really cool moment. Rob says, also the crew not really understanding what it means to be a Ska seems connected to Yeadon's dumb decision. He does not get the crew like they don't get the Ska. Well, I can see that being a reason for sure why Yeadon doesn't ever trust them or like them necessarily. But I mean, we got into this on a comment on last week's video. I still just don't really buy Yeadon doing that, and I think the reason I don't buy it is because there wasn't enough time established to describe what you are describing as the reasons why Yeadon did what he did. I think that maybe you could say, oh, but it's in the subtext or whatever. But to me, he didn't come across as a common Ska, I'll put it that way. You come like across a common, defeated, hopeless Ska in the street who I would have believed that about. And Yeadon did not come across as that kind of guy because he'd been separated, he had been hiding, he had been trying to build an uprising. Obviously, he was not in the same frame of mind as just a regular average Ska to me. So the fact that he had broken that mold and the fact that he was reaching out to these people, the fact that he was in on the meetings and knew the plan, made it hard to believe that he would do something so stupid. And it's hard for me to really come away from that and see it in a different light. But Spyglass says the Renault Kelsier Kandra thing seemed forced, a little weird, confusing to me. I think he talks about Kandra a little bit here in the annotations, but and I think he does apologize for not like revealing the secret of the Kandra earlier. So that might have been helpful to you, and maybe that'll you'll kind of know where he was coming from when we read that a little bit. But Chocolate Rob says, I mean that the crew reflect on her snapping at them, and they clearly did not understand what she was saying. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. All right, so moving back over to this. Kelsier gets to have some last words in this chapter. He earned them, I think. I'm sorry to keep the truth of Kandra from you for so long. As I said before, however, I needed to leave this explanation off so that the reader could experience the revelation with Vin here. Even if you'd already figured out what Renault was, then I think this scene is more powerful by having the revelations happen like they did. Anyway, Kelsier is among my personal favorite characters, if only for his depth. I agree. I like Kelsier the best too. He's a complicated, multifaceted man who managed to scam not only the entire Empire, but his own crew at the same time. I felt I had to give him some last words, if only through a letter, so that the reader could bid him a proper farewell. In addition, I wanted him to pass that flower on to Vin, symbolically charging her with Mare's dream, now that Kelsier himself is dead. I think he said something earlier, too, about the Kandra. Maybe I missed it. Anyways, you know, he felt like if he had revealed what the Kandra was before this time, then it would have spoiled the revelation the way that he does it in this scene for Vin and the crew. But he did bring up Kandra. I remember that word. It came in the scene where Ellen was talking with his father, and there was a Kandra there. at Keep Venture, and he was like talking to the Kandra, and they mentioned specifically the word Kandra. And I was like, what the F is a Kandra? And so when they explained it here, it was like, oh, okay, they are like a higher form of a Mistwraith, essentially. They don't really know, but maybe that's what they suspect they are. That can actually change shape, like shape shift into whatever they've sort of like absorbed into themselves. They even foreshadowed that back at the very, very beginning of the book, as that's like one of the Ska legends about Mistwraiths, is that they can take the forms of other people. And that some people thought that Kelsier himself was a Kandra. So, yeah, anyways, I thought it was a fine reveal. It didn't bother me too much. Restless Oblivion says, I did enjoy the revelation that Kandra were full-grown Mistwalkers or Mistwraiths. Rob says, I have to wonder how often he had to update that letter to still be relevant. Restless Oblivion says, do most or all of the nobles know what the Kandra are? And Rob says, pretty much. So, okay. I would think that they would be trying to use Kandra as much as possible, you know, for their politicking, as Sanderson says so much in the book. He says here, I hope you notice the difference between the way Kelsier got into the room and the way Vin did. He's talking about getting into the palace. And I did notice that. You know, he kills and moves past him, and she basically persuades them to just leave, right? Shows a pretty big difference between Kelsier's character and hers. And why I think that she's more of like the proper hero of the story than Kelsier was. She walked with the guards at the front and talked them away, rather than killing them. She just strolled through the guard chamber, the palace where she killed her first time, instead of attacking. Why attack? She's powerful enough that she can just slip through and escape. I did like that. That was very much more of a match for her character. For Kelsier, the killing was always part of the victory. Vin's more goal-oriented, perhaps. In addition, she doesn't like to kill. So her way is to slip by the men. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I noticed that while I was reading, too. Here he says, if I had a chance to rewrite the book again, one of the things I'd change is this scene where Vin gets caught. If you want to imagine it this way instead, pretend that she dropped both Inquisitors completely, and therefore she thought she was safe to inspect the room beyond. I actually don't know if I like that better. Like, I get where he's going. I'll read the rest of it. The Inquisitors can actually heal far more quickly than I've had them do in this book. My problem with this scene is how easily Vin lets herself be cornered and captured. I understand where he's coming from there. I get that. I think that breaking into the room is exactly the sort of thing she'd do. However, I just don't think the writing works here around the section where she gets surprised and grabbed by the Inquisitor. She's more careful than that. The way it's written makes it seem like she gets grabbed simply because that's what needed to happen. There isn't enough drama or enough realization to the scene. I do like what happens afterward, however, Vin using the 11th metal. In this book, we get our first hints regarding just how much allomancy has been hidden and obfuscated by the Lord Ruler. Vin realizes that the 11th metal must be part of the structure of allomantic theory, and is the metal that she's the metal that she's given that makes her lose all of her other metals. I did like that. They made her drink a metal and like all of her metals went away. And yeah, it was a nice realization that there's way more allomancy out there than we thought. Way more than 11 metals. And so it, again, opens up for future expansion in following novels, which I really liked. But yeah, up here, I don't know if I would have liked her to like drop the two Inquisitors, because it was like so hard for Kelsier to do it. And Vin is a powerful allomancer, but she's not on Kelsier's level yet. She has potential to go way beyond him. Way beyond him. But she's not there yet. And so I don't know if her fighting and dropping two Inquisitors would have worked for me. So this didn't bother me tremendously, but I can see maybe why it bothered him. But anyways. Let's see here. Hello, CT Blanco. How's it going? Let me switch back to this real quick. Glad to have you here. Spyglass says, I felt it was way too easy for Ellen to stroll in and save Vin. The reason why that worked okay for me was because he came with the guard of the palace, right? So the guy that she talks to at the front and tells him to leave, and then he goes back and tries to join like the rebellion, and then like Ellen shows up, and then he takes Ellen back with him. So he would have had a good sense for like, how should we get in here? Where should we go? Like he was a guard of the palace. So to me, that's why it worked. I think if Ellen had come by himself, I would have agreed with you. But since he was with like a guard, a soldier of the palace himself, or of the palace itself, that, you know, it seemed to be okay to me that we didn't have like an on-screen explanation of how they got there. To me, it was like that guy knows his way around this place and would have helped them get there. Is anyone else having trouble with the stream? Rob is saying he's having trouble with the stream. I hope not. Hope it's okay for everybody. Okay, let's go back to this. The obligator versus inquisitor political maneuvering here is supposed to feel like only a sliver of a much larger political system. You can, hopefully, imagine the various cantons struggling for dominance over the centuries. I won't read this whole thing, but I did like that. I really liked that, and I liked that Vin was sort of like the center of their plan to overthrow the obligators, and the inquisitors like gain more power in the government. This was just kind of a cool political intrigue thing that I thought added some dimension to the world. I liked it a lot. Okay, so there's two things I want to comment on here. Let's go with what he says here first, then I'm going to come back to this part. It says, the scene with Vin and the Inquisitor is the place where finally I got to bring some closure to Reen's plotline. What the Inquisitor says is true. When it came down to it, or came down to the end, Reen didn't betray Vin. He died before he let that happen. Reen was not a good person. He beat Vin, he was selfish, and he was conniving. However, he did love his sister. Most of his beatings happened because he was worried that she would expose them somehow and get herself killed. He knew that the Inquisitors were chasing her because of her half-breed nature, and so he uprooted them constantly, moving from city to city. He kept her alive, teaching her to be harsh, but teaching her to survive. And in the end, after the Inquisitors got him, he didn't betray her. That says a lot about him. And it was a really nice, again, sort of like resolution to her plot arc. She had always assumed that he betrayed her in the end. He had said he was going to. But like to finally realize that he didn't, that people do come back, you know, when Ellen comes back, the fact that she was like, oh, you came back. All of this sort of made me realize that what I had said last week about there being a theme in the story and that it was really more just kind of a fantasy plot is actually completely false. I think there's a very strong theme here about choosing to trust, choosing to hope, choosing to believe, choosing to be involved even if things seem hopeless, even if you might be betrayed by someone you love. It's better to live happy and to choose a positive mindset and to choose to trust people and to choose to love people. And that is better, even though it's going to come with some inevitable betrayals and pain and suffering along the way. But to live the way that Vin was living in the beginning of the story, where you avoid all of the suffering and all of the betrayal and backstabbing and all of that sort of pain, is worse still, because you have no human connections, you're constantly on guard, you're miserable. And that it's better to accept all the pain that comes with learning to trust, but that trusting is ultimately better. And that was very beautifully delivered here at the ending of the story. I thought it was very, very well done and very poignant theme. I really liked it quite a lot. Restless Oblivion says, the people are just discussing whether the stream's dropping out. Rob says, it would be an interesting book to read from the Inquisitor perspective. That's actually a good point. That would be very interesting if the whole novel was written from the Inquisitor hunting her the whole time. Spyglass says, remember to smile. CD Blanco says, they had some crazy-ass plot twists with these last chapters, didn't they? Lord Ruler's ID, Reen, Renault, Kelsier's plan. Yeah, like a ton. It really moved really fast, and it was the reason why I couldn't put the damn book down when I was reading it last Tuesday. But like I said at the beginning of the stream, it makes it so that I forget some of the details when I read that quickly. I like to digest it in smaller chunks more slowly so that I'm coming back to it and refreshing my memory and keeping things And Marsh as well. Yeah, Marsh being the Inquisitor. Really cool moment. I really enjoyed that a lot. Okay, anyways, back to this. This is not related to the story, but he writes up here, getting tense now. I love endings. They're my favorite part of books to write. Once I wrote 16,000 words in one day to finish up a book. That was my record until I finished Scribbler a few weeks back. I did 23,000 on that book in one day. That is unbelievable. From someone who is writing a novel, has been writing a novel for 16 years, the thought of writing 16,000 words is unthinkable to me. 23,000 is just like, what the fetch? And now this is in part because I have two problems. One, I'm a giant perfectionist and I have a very high standard for my own work. And two, I tend to have obsessive compulsive patterns in my thinking. For those of you who have joined me on some of my streams where I'm working on like the reviews for the channel and stuff, you'll notice that sometimes I'm getting really stuck on something, and people will suggest, well, why don't you just move on to another part and come back to this later? And I can't. I cannot operate like that. It bothers me. My mind is obsessed with fixing this thing that's wrong before I can feel good to move on to something else. And so it's the reason why I've been writing and writing and writing and writing for so many years, yet I'm only right now about 75,000 words into the novel. And when it's done, it's probably going to be in the realm of 80 to 90,000 total, probably like 85, somewhere between 85 and 90, which is, in comparison to this book, tiny. But, you know, maybe more in the same realm as The Last Wish, which is the last book that we read, the Witcher novel that we read. Something like 300 to 350 pages total. To me, that's a sweet spot. I really like books that are about that length. When it gets much beyond 400 pages, I start to go like, I don't know if I want to do this. The exception being that, I mean, this was twice that long. This was 650 pages. But it read really quickly and easily. I don't know how to describe it. It didn't feel like a 650-page book, even though it was. Anyways, point is, the thought of writing that many words in one day is astonishing. That would take so much editing to go back and like fix that. That just means your stream of consciousness you just go and you think about fixing later. Because I think the most I've ever written in one day was 2,000 words, and I felt like I was cooking. I felt like I was in the groove. I felt like, man, it's really flowing to me right now. Most days, because I'm not doing it full time, I write for a few hours at the end of the day, maybe 3 hours at a time. Most days I do 500 words. If I was writing full time as my full time job, my goal would be to write 1,000 words a day. So, because I edit as I write, and I reword things a million times, and I go back through it, and I edit each chapter like something like 20 times before I'll even show it to somebody. Because to me, I really want the words to be right, and I obsess over it until I move on to the next thing. So I will never be able to write the way that Sanderson writes. That's freaking crazy. Rob says Sanderson avalanche. I guess that's a term. He mentions that later in the annotations that he and his readers have for the way that he works in endings. Doomy Guy says that's some serious passion for writing an ending. CT Blanco says, yeah, now I see what Rob was talking about with the payoffs. Restless Oblivion says sometimes it's hard to separate the writer-editor personas. Rob says, I noticed that kind of thing when you were trying to understand the Chrono Cross explanation videos. You could not move on until you understood the part you're on. Yeah, that's just part of my personality. It's like, I don't want to move forward until I know I've got this handled. I got it. It's clean. I'm in the groove. I know what's up here. I can move on to the next thing. That's just kind of how I am. I don't feel comfortable moving on to something else until I feel like I've got a grasp or that I've completed this thing and it's the way I want it to be. Okay. Here he says, her choosing to stay with Sazed, followed by Ellen's appearance, are very important events for Vin. Her decision is, this is just talking about the fulfillment of her arc. Then her choosing to stay with Sazed, even though he was, it was dangerous for her to do so. Her loyalty to him, very against her personality at the beginning. And then the fact that Ellen comes back for her and you came back. Very satisfying conclusion to Vin's arc in the story. Loved it. Atium shows the power of someone else. Malitium, which I think is the 11th metal, shows the past of someone else. Gold shows the past of yourself. And Electrum, Gold's complement, shows you the future of yourself. He's describing here essentially like how she was confused about whether or not she'd be able to kill the Lord Ruler, right? Because I think she was under the assumption that Gold and the 11th metal were complements. So she's like, I was able to touch myself in the past, my past self with Gold, when I was burning Gold. So when I burn the 11th metal, I should be able to touch the Lord Ruler's old self and kill him, right? But no, Gold is a complement of a different metal. Gold and Electrum show you the past and future of yourself, while Atium and the 11th metal, Malitium, show you the past of someone else and the future of someone else. So that was clever. He has very well thought out magic systems. I'll give it to him. He really, really thinks that stuff through, and he's very consistent. His magic systems are amazing. They really are. Rob says you need to develop schizophrenia so you can separate some personas out. One to write separate from the other to edit. That'd be phenomenal, actually. I've always had this fantasy of having a twin that was like really similar to me and we were into the same stuff, and then like he could work on one game's review and I could work on like another thing. Like two me's basically, like working on different stuff. Anyways. Okay, I planned for this return here. I wish again I could have done more with him. There was another whole book going on with him being watched by the Inquisitors. He's talking about Marsh's reveal, which I thought was perfect here. Him thinking that he'd earned their suspicion when they were really just impressed with him and planning to make him into one of them. That's how it usually works with Inquisitors. They grab a new recruit, usually an older one, and draft him into their ranks before one of the other cantons has a chance to corrupt him too much. Because, that actually really works with the Inquisitors and the Obligators being at odds with each other. It's like, we don't want you to get another Obligator, like a promising Obligator on your side. We're going to recruit that guy to become an Inquisitor and join us. So, anyways, loved that Marsh became an Inquisitor. Thought that was super cool. The fact that the Lord Ruler built weaknesses into the Inquisitor so he could kill them easily because he's not a god as he claims to be, right? He has weaknesses. Liked that. Anyways, really good stuff. Really good stuff. Let's see, what was it here? It's talking about he felt he might be breaking his own rules here with the way that he has Vin beat the Lord Ruler. So he goes into explanation here about the rules of the magic systems and stuff. But I thought it worked. I didn't have any problems with it. It just seemed to me like, oh, there's a new element here with the mist that he hasn't explained yet. I'm sure he'll explain that in a future book or whatever. It is a little bit against his philosophy to not explain the magic first, but this is also thematically the end of the story and a big twist, and so I don't know. For me, it worked just fine. My favorite secret in the novel is the fact that the Lord Ruler is actually Rashek. I'm still not sure if this revelation will mean as much to readers as I want it to. Depends on them reading and caring about the story that happened in the past. However, when it comes together, I think it really pays off. So the concept that started me on this book was, what if the Dark Lord won? I thought about that, then figured it would be more scary if the hero had become the Dark Lord, only something worse. Kind of a what if Frodo kept the ring idea. Well, I eventually decided to twist that into what if Sam killed Frodo and took the ring, then became the Dark Lord. Like Kelsier says, there's always another secret. Yeah, I liked that too. Another nice twist there at the end, that Alendi, who was never named in the story, was killed by Rashek, and that Rashek ascended instead of him. And essentially took up the responsibility of fighting off the deepness, but in so doing also subjugated the world. So there's a little bit of nuance there. I liked that. CT Blanco says, are Kandra emotionless or something? Hold on, let me read your whole thing. It seems like Renault was robotic in his delivery, and Sanderson really emphasized Vin's feelings of uncomfortableness. Rob says, Kandra can be very uncomfortable when not being someone else. It is the nature of their lifestyles rather than their biology. Restless Oblivion says, the ultimate method actors. Yes. Restless Oblivion says, who did Daniel Day-Lewis eat? Who? That's funny. Rob says, I say Rashek was Boromir rather than Sam. So why do you say Boromir? Because, do you mean that just like loosely or generally? Because the one thing that separates Boromir from Rashek for me is the fact that like Rashek was never actually noble. Boromir redeems himself through his noble act at the end of Fellowship, and sort of like casts off his fear and becomes who he truly was inside, and all that. But Rashek hated Elendi the whole time, at least it seemed to me. I don't think Rashek ever showed that he had like a noble side to him. He seemed like kind of a bad guy most of the time. I guess he just didn't like the fact that a non-Terraceman was going to fulfill the prophecy, right? He believed it should have been a Terraceman, or it should have been him, or something like that. And he let that hatred of Elendi sort of corrupt him or whatever. Of course, this entire story is not necessarily fleshed out very well, so there's probably some nuance that he would have written into the character if he was just writing that as the novel, right? Rob says Sam was too loyal. That I agree with. Boromir wanted the power and tried to take the ring. CD Blanco says, I really appreciate all of Sanderson's spark notes. It seems like he's very transparent with his work and fans. Thank you for bringing that up. That's actually something I meant to say back there. When he was talking about his disappointment in how like certain things came out and wishing he could rewrite it or whatever, I like that transparency. It shows a humility in the guy where he's like, you know, this part didn't really work for me. I wish that I had done better at this part. It shows a human nature to him that you don't really see. There's a transparency with a lot of writers and directors where they try to like defend their work to the death. Most recently, the director of the last Star Wars movie, Rian Johnson, just like to his grave, he will never admit that something went wrong with the film and it's exactly what it's supposed to be, and the people who criticize it just don't really understand the character, right? I don't like that. I like it when creators are able to look at their own work and go, you know, I could have done this better. I wish that I had, you know, done this instead, or this wasn't as effective as I had hoped it would be. It shows that they're human. It shows that despite the fact that you're never going to make a perfect story and that there are always going to be problems with it, it can still really impact people. It can still be really great, and people can still love it, even though there are going to be parts of it that don't work all the time. And for me, that's a very comforting thing because, like I said, I'm a huge perfectionist, and I have a really hard time moving on when something isn't exactly the way I want it to be. And it's a very frustrating thing for me. Even just today, I was editing a previous chapter because I've finally, with my buddy who's a linguist, he's created an original language, and we went through and we had a consistent naming system to name all the places in the book and the people. And so I finally replaced all of my tentative names in the book with the final names. And I've been going through and doing editing while I'm replacing the names. And, you know, even a chapter that I feel like I've edited 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 times, I read it and it's just like, oh, the wording just stumbles. It's not quite right. It doesn't feel right. And I get so frustrated, and it's like, you've got to learn that it's never going to be perfect, but that doesn't mean that people aren't going to appreciate it, aren't going to love it. And, I didn't think that Mistborn was perfect. I've mentioned some things that I didn't think were as effective as they could have been, or I wish that it had been done a little differently. But I was still absolutely freaking fascinated by this and super hooked and really engrossed and invested in the characters and in the ending. And it was a very, very satisfying read, and I really loved it. And it was very inspiring. So, it's nice that he's able to admit, like, there are things that, he didn't necessarily love. So I think that's great. CT Blanco says, ruin Johnson. Dude McGuy says, Last Jedi has no flaws. Clearly Johnson is right, and 50% of the general audience are just mad that their Snoke theory was wrong. Rob says, Rashek is a Boromir that did manage to take the ring, is what I was getting at. That makes sense. I see where you're going now. Or so it seems from the current understanding. Restless Oblivion says, Sanderson is obviously very comfortable with his own work and process to be so open about it. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's finish this up. So leave it at this. It's a foreboding ending. I know. Elend is king, but honestly, none of those people have ever done anything like this before. The crew has no experience with government, and Elend has very little, though at least he knows a lot about theory. So then this is a setup for the next book where I wanted to ask some very tough questions. It seems to me that overthrowing the Empire would actually be easier than trying to make it run smoothly. This is what the group is going to have to deal with. I like that. Again, it's amazing to me that he's able to leave it on a note like that, because that feels very unresolved, but it doesn't feel that way at all. It feels very resolved by the end. It's amazing. Very satisfying, yet you're eager for more. It's a perfect ending, in my opinion. Here he says, I was trying to get across here an unexpected consequence of mixing the two magics, like how certain chemicals react oddly when mixed, or even like two computer programs running on the same computer can cause odd reactions. Letting someone use feruchemy and allomancy together makes for some very strange mixtures of powers. I intend to get into this later. I did think that I was very clever, the way that the Lord Ruler manipulated both feruchemy and allomancy to make actual use of the ability to make yourself younger, to manipulate your age with feruchemy. That was very clever. I really liked that. Of course, what this also does is undeify the Lord Ruler somewhat, which I also liked, which is intentional. I don't want it to undermine the accomplishment of the characters. What they did was difficult, and they achieved a great victory. However, what I'm trying to give in this book, however, is a sense of foreboding. Very effective, and it worked, and I really liked that. I think my books have happy endings, ominous ones sometimes, but bittersweet ones, definitely. But they're happy, at least for me. I'm an incurable romantic, and I like it when two people find each other. Of course, this isn't the end. Vin and Elend don't really have a relationship yet. They have the budding beginning of one. We'll deal with the more testing elements of relationships in the second book. For now, however, they get to be happy. That's a rare enough thing in Mistborn world that it's worth noting. Again, just wanted to note how he's able to have an ominous ending and a totally satisfying, happy one at the same time. That seems like those two things are incongruent, but he did it. He pulled it off. Perfect ending, in my opinion. Sets up so you can write more, sets up so that there's definitely still conflict, but it feels complete and resolved, and it feels self-contained. That's very important to me. Okay, that is it for Mistborn. If you guys have any further insights or anything else that you want to comment on, feel free to do that right now while I talk a little bit about Crime and Punishment. So we're going to be reading Crime and Punishment next. Again, I'll put the links to the audiobooks in Discord. I'll go ahead and send it to you guys right now as well. Just click on this one. Again, there's two parts to this. Remember, there's two parts. This is not the whole book. This is only half of it. So we'll have to go through both parts here. But I'll put it in the chat for you so that you guys can listen to that. I know that the Constance, what is her name? Anyways, there's a bunch of different translations for this book. And the one by Constance, I think
Recorded Books presents an unabridged recording of Crime and Punishment.
Why don't I hear anything?
By Fyodor Dostoevsky.
You guys can hear it, but I can't.
Translated by Constance Garnett.
Constance Garnett. The Constance Garnett translation is the one that I have chosen to go with because because of its ease of access. I think that it's even in the public domain. So a lot of people have done revisions of her work, basically. Anyways, because of its ease of access, I've decided to do that translation. I know some people will think, oh, but it's so dry. It's not the prose isn't very good. But I think to avoid people reading a ton of different translations, I mean, you can read whatever translation you want. If you wanted to go with a different translation, that's fine. There are some newer translations that people are saying are really good. I'll let you know which ones. Crime and Punishment. There's a much more modern one that came out recently by I think it was in 2014 it came out. And it reads in a more more modern English by Oliver Reddy. I read some excerpts of that, and it did seem really well done. So if you'd like to read the Oliver Reddy translation, that's supposed to be pretty good. Another one is the Pevier and Volokhonsky translation. Pevier and Volokhonsky. I'll put it on the screen so you guys can see what I'm looking at. Pevier and Volokhonsky translation. That was done in the 90s. So again, a little bit more modern in terms of the language used. But people have said that's very good because Volokhonsky is a native Russian speaker, Pevier English speaker. So they worked together, husband and wife, on this. And apparently it's very good. But this Oliver Reddy translation, where's his name? Right here. Oliver Reddy. Is supposed to be very good as well. So if you wanted to pick up one of those, that'd be fine. But I'm going to be reading the Constance Garnett version and listening to this audiobook alongside it. And just because of its ease of access, the fact that you can listen to it for free, it's in the public domain, all that kind of stuff. So I feel, comfortable sharing this. I need to decide on exactly how we're going to split this up. Because if there's 20 hours, then we need to be basically doing 5 hours a week. So, yeah, 5, 10. So, we basically need to get up to chapter 2. Read up through chapter 2 of part 2. So, at least for this week, at least this week's assignment. I don't know about the breakdowns for the rest of the week. But for this week, read all the way through part 1. That's not... What are you doing? Part 1. All the way up to, so all the way through part 1, and then part 2, get through chapter 1 and stop at chapter 2. That is what I would say should be our first assignment. And then the next week, we would read chapter 2, starting at chapter 2, and we would read all the way through to chapter 2 of part 3 here. So yeah. Read all the way up to part 2, chapter 2. Stop at chapter 2 in part 2. That is going to be the first assignment for Crime and Punishment for next week. Okay. Let me see what people are saying here. Rob says, a note, we get a scene where Ellen gets to see her in her majesty and is wed and in her underwear, so his awe is overwhelmed by embarrassment. Inquisitor vision, these things are only really human-shaped anymore. Once men, now something else. Yeah, I liked that what Marsh had to sacrifice. Marsh essentially had to sacrifice his humanity to learn how to beat these things. And it was kind of tragic, but it's cool. It makes him such a cooler character, what he's willing to go through, right? Rob says, I've mentioned Magic the Gathering being an influence. He has described how the interaction between allomancy and feruchemy is like cleverly stacking your cards. Well, that's actually interesting. Where do you think the trilogy is going? I don't really know. Because, like, if you base it just on the questions that were left unresolved, Vin can obviously access more than just allomancy. She can access other powers. So, obviously, we're going to explore that. All the nobility fled the city or, died fighting in their keeps or whatever. So, obviously, there's going to be some power struggle. I wouldn't believe that, like, Elend's father, for instance, would just allow him to become the king, right? There's obviously going to be some political intrigue and some real struggle for, like, actual, like, who's going to hold the power now that the Lord Ruler is gone. So I would think there'll be some factions there fighting for power that aren't just going to allow Elend Venture, the freaking joke of House Venture, to come in and just, like, take over. The Ska, I think, will have a hard time with the transition just because of all their conditioning, so there could be some problems there. And, he never really answered what it was that happened between the original hero Elendi and Rashek, and what it is that Rashek, I guess, did when he ascended, like the power that he received upon the ascendancy, the nature of that, like what that is all about. So I would think those are the major questions, or at least plot threads that are left unresolved that would be addressed now in the upcoming book. I think there's a lot of mystery behind Sazed as well, that there's a lot of room to expand on, and the Keepers. So I would think those were probably the things. Rob says, have you tried reading the chapter bumps on their own, as Brandon suggests? I haven't yet, but I paid a lot more attention to them and followed them pretty well. But that is a good idea. I should probably go back through and just read those straight through. CT Blanco says, correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't someone in the story mention that a person couldn't have both allomancy and feruchemy? I don't remember that, but maybe. Rob says, I like how Elend immediately comes up with the plan to join the Lekals. It's a good, unorthodox plan. Yeah, I like that too. Is Siri Alexa reading the audiobook? I don't know. I've only listened to part of it. I thought it was a little dry, but it was okay. Rob says, aluminum is the metal that Vin was force-fed. It has a special property in all Cosmere magic systems, usually nullifying or insulating properties. Some topics to try. Restless Oblivion says, the deepness reminds me of the darkness, or whatever it's called, from A Wrinkle in Time. I hope there's more backstory on Rashek. I never read him as a 100% pure villain. Same here. So, anyways, thanks, dudes. It's been great. We'll see if you guys vote for the following, the second novel in the Mistborn trilogy here, as the next book you guys vote on after Crime and Punishment. So be thinking about what you want to read after that. But I'm excited for Crime and Punishment. I am real excited for it. Really, really interesting philosophical concept. So hopefully you guys have already picked up your copy or whatever, and we will discuss that next Tuesday. Until then, have a great week. I'll see you on Friday for Final Fantasy Friday. If you want to watch Kaysen's playthrough of Kingdom Hearts 3, he'll be streaming that a little bit later today. But otherwise, I'll see you very soon. Peace out.